Red Clay Canyon bled into the horizon like an open wound as the sun dipped low behind the mesas, painting the sky in a wash of orange and bruised purple. The wind kicked up dust in thin spirals that whispered along the boardwalk of a half-forgotten town, too small to matter on a map, too stubborn to disappear. Its heart beat slow and unsteady inside the Copper Fong Saloon, where smoke coiled like ghosts above sweating bottles and tired men. Inside, the air was thick with cheap cigar smoke and the stench of old sweat. The piano in the corner clinked out a broken tune, its rhythm as lopsided as the drunk trying to dance to it. Conversation swelled and dipped like the tide, hollow laughs, clinks of glass, and the occasional slap of cards on stained green felt. But when she walked in, the whole room shifted, like a thread pulled too tight. Evelyn Graves moved with the silence of a woman who had walked too long with ghosts. She wore a dress the color of funeral ash, cinched at the waist like mourning wrapped in elegance. Her boots struck the floorboards soft as thunder. Silver-gray eyes swept the saloon once, quiet and unwavering, before she took a seat alone at a corner table, the bottle beside her half empty, untouched. No one spoke to her. Not yet. But they all looked. She was a story people were too afraid to finish. Widow Graves. The marshal's wife. The woman who hadn't cried at the funeral. Who hadn't spoken his name since. Who hadn't left the canyon town she never chose to live in. It might have stayed quiet if not for the swinging batwing doors creaking open with a shriek that silenced even the piano. 3 shadows stepped in, all swagger and stale whiskey, sunburned and swollen with cruelty. Clay Maddox led the pack, his boots caked in mud, his eyes mean. Burl Dog-Eye Sweeney followed, his face as crooked as his spine. And behind them, Hank Lutter chewed a matchstick, drunker than he was smart. They moved like they owned the air. Sons of big ranchers, they never worked a day that didn't end with someone bleeding. They drank, they fought, they teased, and the town let them, because it was easier than fighting wolves when you had no teeth left. Clay spotted her first, sitting alone with her bottle. He nudged Dog-Eye, who snorted and whispered something that made them all laugh. Well, well, Clay drawled, swaggering toward her like a man who mistook his own shadow for power. If it ain't the Black Widow herself. You keepin' that chair warm for your husband, or you finally ready to talk to the living? Evelyn didn't answer. She stared at her glass like it held a secret, her hand motionless on the table. Burl stepped closer, letting his boot heel drag with an exaggerated scrape. You deaf, lady? Or just too proud to talk to men with warm blood? Lutter giggled, slurring. Maybe she's waiting on her dead men to come back, thinking maybe if she stares hard enough, she'll see him in the whiskey. The room tensed like a wire. Conversations died. The barkeep froze mid-polish, glass still damp in his hands. The piano stuttered and fell silent, the player's hand suspended above the keys like he was praying to no God at all. Clay leaned forward, planting both hands on her table. Tell me, Mrs. Graves, he hissed, breath sour. How's a woman like you sleep at night knowing the only man ever loved her bled out with his back turned? Her eyes flicked up slowly, as if it took effort to meet the gaze of something so beneath her. For a moment, there was no sound but the soft creak of wood as the town held its breath. Then Lutter moved behind her and kicked her chair leg, just enough to send her backward off balance. The motion was so fast most never saw it. One moment she was falling, then she wasn't. She'd already pivoted, feet planted like roots, body upright, coat pulled back just enough to free the pistol from her hip. The steel gleamed once in the lamplight, cold and merciless. A single crack split the air. One gunshot. Clay Maddox's body jerked first, collapsing sideways with a look of confusion that never had time to become fear. Burl dropped next, bloodless and limp, before he could even reach for his belt. Lutter's legs gave way like what straw as he stared down at the tiny hole in the center of his chest, blinking as if he could unsee it. The saloon held still. Even the wind outside paused, as if the desert itself was stunned. Evelyn's hand lowered the pistol slowly. Her breath hadn't changed. No tremor in her fingers, no thrill of violence on her face, only a deep, unshakable quiet. She holstered the weapon in a motion so smooth it felt rehearsed, then turned her gaze to the stunned crowd. The bartender swallowed hard. The pianist didn't dare move. She took a slow sip from her glass. Leave them, she said. Her voice was calm as dust settling on a coffin. They had it coming. No one argued. The town was quieter the next morning, but not in the way peace feels. It was the hush that follows something unnatural, when even the wind seems to step lighter over the ground. Horses refused to drink. Children stared at their mothers without asking questions. The saloon door still swung gently, as if trying to forget what they'd witnessed. No one swept the blood. Sheriff Harlan stood in the middle of it all, a coffee gone cold at his hand, had tipped low against the rising sun. His badge looked duller than usual, the kind of dull that no polish could fix. He'd seen violence before, wars between ranchers, men knifed over cards, brothers shot over cattle. But this, 3 men dead with one shot. All of them hit the ground before the echo had even rolled off the canyon wall. He questioned the bartender first. All the men could say was, "She didn't blink, Sheriff. Just drew and dropped him." Like she'd been waiting. The pianist didn't speak at all. The others nodded like men trying to agree with thunder. No one could explain it. No one dared try. He found her where he expected, up past the ridge road, in the weathered little cabin where she'd lived for 5 years without once coming to the town social. Smoke curled from the chimney. The door was ajar, like it always was, as if daring danger to walk through. Inside, Evelyn Graves sat at a pinewood table, her pistol disassembled in the golden lamplight, the barrel shining in the rhythm of her cloth. Her eyes didn't rise when he stepped in. The floor creaked just once beneath his boot. "They say you never missed," Harlan said, voice low and half apologetic. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. "They don't know me." "Maybe not," he said, glancing around. Neat place. Sparse. A Bible with a cracked spine. An oil painting of a canyon at sunset, unsigned. A small mirror over a dry sink, too dusty to reflect much. But I've seen men shoot for 20 years and still miss from 10 feet in a panic. She finished wiping the cylinder, fitted it back into place with a click of long-practiced fingers. Then she looked at him, and Harlan felt the weight of her gaze the way a man feels rain before it falls. Steady. Cold. Certain. "I've missed before," she said. "Once. I won't again." He didn't ask when. He didn't have to. Before she was Evelyn Graves, the town knew her as Evelyn McBride. That name used to mean something in Texas. Her father ran cattle drives. Her mother stitched coats for Confederate officers. Evelyn had ridden side by side with Drover since she was 9, pistol holstered on her hip like a natural limb. But none of that mattered the way her love for Marshal Thomas Graves did. He'd been taller than most, kind and square-jawed, the sort of men who made even the lawless slow their horses near the edge of town. They married under the open sky in Wichita Falls, a ceremony so small even the preacher seemed unsure it counted. But it did. She wore white lace. He wore his badge. And when he taught her to shoot, it wasn't for show. They trained like soldiers, dueling dummies, shooting coins off stumps, firing while riding at a gallop. They moved together like breath and bone. Then came the Maddox raid outside Abilene. Just 5 men, just one ambush. A simple patrol that ended with a bullet in Thomas's back as he dismounted. She never saw the shooter, just the blood, the way his head fell forward like a curtain, the sound he made trying to say her name one last time. She had missed that day. Fired 3 times. Hit nothing but sky. She buried him alone. Then she disappeared. Harlan watched her now as she stood, reassembled pistol in hand, turning it once toward the window and back, as if measuring sunlight through the iron sights. "They were drunk," he said, carefully. "Could have been handled different." "They died the way they lived," she replied, mocking what they didn't understand. "You're not under arrest," he added. "Town's too scared to argue. But you should know. Clay had a brother, Cal Maddox. Been riding with the Hollow Creek boys out past Santa Cruz. I know who he is. He'll come for blood. You know that too." She nodded once, as if ticking a box. Outside, wind scraped across the dry grass and lifted the edge of her black curtain. Harlan looked at her one last time, then tipped his hat and stepped out. He didn't say goodbye. With people like her, you don't waste words on endings. By noon, the whispers had started. At the general store, they said she must be a bounty hunter, hiding under a widow's name. At the barber's chair, someone guessed she was ex-Pinkerton, sent to kill off outlaw remnants still lurking in canyon towns. Others whispered about her eyes, not their color, but their stillness. Like they didn't blink, didn't change, didn't forget. Children dared each other to throw stones near her fence. None did. Not after sundown. Cal Maddox heard about his brother's death 2 days later. He was in a gambling tent outside San Ramon when the word came in. 1 shot, 3 men dead, all by a woman in a black dress who didn't even spit after pulling the trigger. He folded his card slowly, took his hat from the hook. No word spoken, just a cold resolve that ran deeper in him than blood. He rode out alone, not because he didn't have men, but because this was personal. Harlan knew it, too. He saw the dust trail long before he saw the horse. The same way you smell lightning before you see it split the sky. And up on the ridge, Evelyn sat on her porch, pistol freshly cleaned, eyes on the horizon, as if she'd been expecting the storm for years. The heat arrived first, low and sharp, clinging to the wooden siding of the buildings like it meant to stay. It soaked into boots, tightened throats, and turned breath into something dry and brittle. That was when they knew trouble was coming. Not just heat from the sky, but the kind that rides a horse and doesn't blink. Cal Maddox came back to Red Clay Canyon the way thunder creeps over the hills, slow, rumbling, and unspoken until it's too late. He brought 2 men with him, both strangers, both hard-eyed and pale as if made of salt and dust. The kind of men paid in silver and silence. No one greeted them. Doors were locked before the hooves even stopped. Curtains drawn. Hammers cocked behind closed shutters. The copper-fongs shut before high noon, a first in 5 years. Children were ushered into basements. Dogs wouldn't bark. And in the quiet corners of town, the name Evelyn Graves spread like wildfire through dry brush. Some called her a murderess, others a saint. But all agreed, she'd be the one to finish this. From her cabin on the ridge, Evelyn watched the riders enter with no surprise, only certainty. She lit no lamp that night. Instead, she took a box from beneath the floorboards, walnut, worn smooth with time, and inside it, her wedding ring still gleamed. Not with polish, but memory. The metal looked softer now, smaller somehow. She pressed it to her lips once, then carried it beyond the fence where wild sage grew near the rocks. There, with her bare hands, she dug a hole the size of her palm. The soil was dry, hard-packed. She placed the ring at the bottom like a seed that would never bloom, then covered it without prayer. Inside, she dipped her pen in ink and wrote by lantern light. No greeting. No signature. Just a letter, written with the stillness of someone who already knew how the story ended. The next morning, Cal Maddox tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and walked in like he owned the land the town stood on. Sheriff Harlan didn't rise. Just looked up from behind the desk, tired, jaw tight. She killed my brother, Cal said, voice like gravel dragged across a floor. She stopped him from doing worse, Harlan replied. Cal smiled without warmth. You defending her now? I ain't defending anyone, the sheriff said. But I saw what he became. Saw what she had to be. Won't matter, Cal said, stepping closer, hand resting lightly near his revolver. Justice will be done. She already gave it. Cal leaned over the desk. Then she can choke on the next helping. From the rooftop of the undertaker's shop, Evelyn lay flat beneath a length of canvas, her rifle nestled beside her. The brass scope glinted once before she tilted it down, shadow swallowing the shine. Through the glass she watched them, Cal's boots, the curve of his wrist, the nervous twitch of the hired gun across the street. She could have ended it then. One breath, one squeeze. But she didn't. She slid the bolt back, disarmed the chamber, and lowered the rifle. Killing from above wasn't her way. Not anymore. If this was to end, it would be on equal ground, where dust met boots and blood stained eye to eye. An hour later, she rode into town slow and alone, her mare moving with solemn patience. She wore no black this time, just canvas pants, her father's old leather vest, and a bandana tied around her wrist like a memory. Her pistol holster hung low, clean and oiled, the sun catching its edge like a whisper of warning. They were waiting in front of the copper-fong. Cal and his men stood like statues molded from vengeance. The townsfolk gathered from porches and rooftops, some with rifles held loosely, others with prayers buried in their palms. The silence stretched. Evelyn stopped 10 feet from them, dismounted with the grace of someone stepping into her own grave. Well, Cal sneered, ain't you a sight? Come to join your husband, widow. She didn't respond. Should have stayed in your shack, he said, spitting in the dirt between them. I'm gonna plant you beside him. Her face stayed unreadable, but her eyes flickered to the stain on the ground. Then up. You talk too much, she said. He grinned, hand darting toward his holster like a snake uncoiling. Too slow. Her shot cracked like a bone snapping, and Cal screamed as his pistol flew from his shattered hand. Blood sprayed across his vest. He dropped to his knees, clutching the ruined limb, rage twisting his face. One of the hired guns panicked. He drew and fired, the shot ringing wide as Evelyn dove behind a water trough. Dust burst around her boots. She rolled once, came up to one knee, and fired back, one clean bullet. It struck him dead between the eyes. He was falling before he even realized he'd drawn. The final gunman hesitated, caught between loyalty and self-preservation. Evelyn turned her gaze on him, but her finger never touched the trigger. He ran, dropped his weapon in the dirt, and sprinted out of town like hell chased him. When the silence returned, it was deeper than before. Not fearful, final. People stepped from their doors. The pastor crossed himself. Sheriff Harlan watched it all from the steps of his office, arms crossed, face unreadable. Evelyn walked past Cal, still howling in pain, and looked toward the gathered crowd. "I ain't the law," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Just the end of the line. The days that followed weren't loud. They didn't come with celebrations or parades. No one toasted her name. But something deeper shifted, something that couldn't be named. It began in the silences, longer pauses at the general store, softer steps across the boardwalk, and glances not of fear, but of respect, the kind that doesn't need words. The town had seen justice walk among them, and it had worn a woman's boots. One by one, quiet revolutions bloomed. The pastor's wife began wearing her husband's old pistol on her hip, unpolished but loaded. The blacksmith's daughter learned how to reload in under 10 seconds. A seamstress pinned a small derringer beneath her apron. Women who had long lived in the shadows of their men stepped just a little taller, and the men didn't argue. They'd seen enough to know better. Sheriff Harlan came riding up to Evelyn's cabin just after sundown 3 days later, his hat low, his boots dusted from the trail. The scent of mesquite smoke drifted from her chimney, mingling with the heavy quiet of the canyon beyond. He dismounted slow, not bothering to knock. She was sitting on the porch, her rifle leaning beside her like an old friend. "I need to ask," he said, sitting down beside her. "The town's whispering like a church before confession. Might be you should finally tell someone the truth." Her hands were still, her eyes watching the last edge of sunlight bleed off the far cliffs. "It was war when it started," she said. "Not the one in the papers. The quiet kind. My father trained horses for the cavalry. My mother made field maps no general ever saw. But I was too restless for sewing, too sharp-eyed for writing drills." She exhaled slowly, as though releasing years from her chest. "They called me Annie Smith back then. Pinkertons don't like names to follow you. I rode dispatch, ran traps, tracked deserters. By 18, I could outshoot most of the men who trained me." Harlan said nothing. "Then I met Thomas Graves," she continued. "Marshall Graves. He didn't know me as a Pinkerton, just as a woman with a quick mind and steady hand who made him feel like the world wasn't broken beyond repair." Her voice caught slightly, not with tears, but weight. "I left the badge, left the name, became Evelyn, learned how to cook without ration slips, learned how to laugh without looking behind me. And then he died." She nodded, back turned, trusting men he shouldn't have. "I buried my guns with him. Swore to stay still like he asked. Be quiet. Harmless." She looked down at her hands, calloused and strong, veins like dried riverbeds. "Then Clay Maddox laid his hand on my shoulder in that saloon, and I knew stillness would kill me faster than bullets ever did." The wind moved through the canyon like breath through a hollow bone. A morning dove called once from the treetops and fell silent. Harlan looked at her, not as a sheriff, not as a man, but as someone who understood the burden of oaths. "Was the letter for him?" he asked. She nodded, then stood. "Buried it with him. Under the apple tree." The two walked together to the grove just past the cabin, where a single crooked tree stood, branches bent under their own memory. At the base, the earth was freshly turned, a stone resting at the head like punctuation. She knelt and touched the dirt. "I held still like you asked," she whispered, "until stillness was the wrong kind of death." Later that night, beneath a half-moon sky veiled in smoke, Evelyn loaded 3 bodies into a mule cart. No one helped. No one offered. They simply watched from the shadows as she rolled past, her silhouette black against the pale starlight. She took them beyond Boot Hill, past the marked graves and stone crosses, where the land forgot names and mercy. There she dug the holes herself. Shallow. Unmarked. She said no words as she laid them down. "Burl. Hank." and Cal Maddox with his hand still wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage. When she was done, she stood for a long while, dirt beneath her nails, sweat trailing down her back, breath steady but not easy. The moonlight cast her shadow long and narrow over the fresh mounds. A crow called once from the rocks and was gone. She didn't sleep that night. Only sat on her porch with the lantern burning low, the rifle across her lap, watching the dark like it might answer. At dawn, children were the first to see it. Painted not in blood, but carved with a branding iron into a plank above the copper Fong Saloon. Just 4 words, burned deep and forever. By the time the snowmelt reached the canyons, the tale had already traveled farther than the wind. They told it in hushed tones beside dying campfires and roadhouse stoves, passed along by drovers, drifters, and traveling showmen who couldn't quite remember if they'd seen it themselves or just dreamed it. A woman in black. A single bullet. 3 dead men before the sound had faded. Some said it was trick shooting. A ricochet off the lantern chain, splitting midair, like circus magic spun from smoke. Others swore it was witchcraft, that she moved faster than a rattler and aimed by listening to breath. But they all agreed on one thing: she didn't miss. They called her the Widow. They never used her name. Names were for mortals. Legends had titles. Travelers began arriving in Red Clay Canyon, dusty boots and hopeful eyes, hoping to catch a glimpse of the saloon where it happened, the stool where she sat, the floor still marked with ghost blood. They'd knock on the bar and ask, "Did it really happen?" All 3. 1 shot. And the barkeep would shrug, polishing a glass that never quite got clean, and say, "I was there. I ain't ever seen faster." But the widow was gone. 1 week after the last gun hit the dirt, Evelyn Graves vanished without a word. Her cabin stood empty. The firewood stack was untouched, the bed made tight, the table set for one. Only the mirror had changed, wiped clean, as if someone wanted to see themselves one last time. Sheriff Harlan rode out that same morning, wind tugging at his duster, unsure of what he expected. He stopped at the apple tree, that crooked sentinel on the hill where her husband lay. The grave had been tended, fresh flowers laid, the soil raked smooth like someone had said goodbye in silence. Her footprints were still there in the dew, facing east. He didn't report her missing. Didn't send for bounty posters. Some folks don't go missing, he figured. They just ride into the part of the map where names don't reach. A few days later, a stranger rode into town. A woman in a long dark coat, had pulled low, revolver strapped crosswise like she wore it since birth. She dismounted with the confidence of someone who didn't ask for permission. A gold star hung from her breast pocket, polished, official. Harlan stepped off the porch of his office and met her halfway. She extended her hand but didn't offer a name. "Marshall," she said. He looked at her a long moment, then smiled and tipped his hat. "You're late." She smiled too, just barely. Out west, farther than most dared ride, where the land curved and broke and stretched under endless sky, a saloon flickered with lamplight at the edge of a forgotten town. The wood was scarred, the windows warped with heat, and the only music came from spur-scraping floorboards. Inside, 5 men sat around a crooked table, all eyes flicking to the door when it creaked. Conversation died the moment she stepped through. She wore a coat the color of storm clouds and boots coated in canyon dust. Her face was sun-worn, unreadable, her gray eyes hollow of fear and full of distance. She moved without noise, her hand resting on her hip not in threat, but in understanding. The barkeep froze, bottle in hand. She didn't ask for whiskey. She just looked around. None of the outlaws rose. None of them smiled. They knew stories. And some stories riding with dust on their shoulders and justice in their silence. Outside, the wind shifted. And somewhere, a voice carried through the dusk, low and sure as legend. Some men ride for gold. Some for vengeance. But there are women who ride for silence, until someone breaks it. And when they do, God help them.